Some lives change because of luck. His changed because of one decision. A decision everyone else ignored. There are days when life tests you quietly. No warnings, no signs, just a moment that arrives disguised as ordinary. On that rainy morning, he thought he was rushing to the most important interview of his life. But destiny had prepared something entirely different. A fragile old woman, a soaked sidewalk, a choice no one expected him to make. These were the pieces that would reshape everything he believed about sacrifice, character, and fate. This isn't just the story of a job opportunity lost, but of a life forever transformed by a single act of compassion. The morning did not begin with the usual promise of routine, but with an uneasy stillness in the air, the kind that makes the world feel heavier than it should, as if something unseen were quietly preparing to unfold. He stepped outside holding his worn backpack, the cold drizzle tapping against the pavement like whispers of a choice waiting to be made, though he had no idea what that choice would be. The city seemed half awake, wrapped in a gray blanket of mist, and as he walked, the wind pushed the rain sideways, forcing him to shield his face. He quickened his pace, knowing he couldn't afford a single delay, not today of all days. Every puddle he splashed through felt like time slipping away. Yet despite his haste, something inside him sensed that the day carried a strange weight. He could feel it in his chest. He could feel it in the silence between his steps. Something was coming, something that would not wait. He had prepared for this interview with the kind of determination only someone who has struggled for years can understand, waking before sunrise, studying through exhaustion, pushing past disappointment after disappointment, clinging to the dream of a better life. This job wasn't simply a career step. It was escape, stability, and dignity all woven together. Every moment of sacrifice led him here, and he repeated that to himself as he hurried through the rain. He imagined the office lobby, the polished floors, the formal conversations he rehearsed in front of the mirror. He imagined finally being seen not as someone trying to survive, but as someone worthy of opportunity. But destiny has a way of interrupting even the most carefully built plans, often at the moment when we least expect it. And as he turned the corner, he felt that invisible shift again, subtle, but unmistakable. Something was changing. Something was waiting for him just ahead. The streets were nearly empty, except for the occasional car splashing through the growing streams of water. He pulled his jacket tighter, feeling the cold seep through the fabric, and silently cursed the weather for choosing today to break loose. Yet it wasn't the rain that made him uneasy. It was the strange sense that the world had slowed down around him. Even the passing vehicles seemed quieter, leaving behind streaks of light across the wet asphalt. He checked the time again. Late, but not hopelessly late. He still had a chance. He still had hope. That hope kept his feet moving even as his anxiety climbed. He breathed deeply, trying to steady himself. He couldn't afford panic. He couldn't afford mistakes. But fate rarely asks permission before placing an obstacle in your path. And as he approached the bus stop, he saw a shape on the ground, a shape that forced his breath to catch in his throat. At first, he thought it was just another person waiting out the rain, sitting low to keep dry, shielding themselves beneath a small overhang. But as he drew closer, his heart tightened. It wasn't someone resting. It was an elderly woman slumped against the bench, trembling, her thin coat clinging to her body, soaked through with cold rainwater. Her hands shook as she attempted to push herself up, but her legs failed beneath her. People walked past quickly, hiding under umbrellas, avoiding her with the kind of practiced indifference cities often teach. Something inside him froze. The interview, the future he had fought for, everything collided with the sight before him. He hesitated, rain running down his forehead. This wasn't the moment for indecision. But fear whispered that stopping could cost him everything. And yet, leaving her there would cost him something far deeper. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, but she didn't lift her head. Her breathing was shallow, and her soaked clothes clung to her fragile frame. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, though he already knew she wasn't. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a weak exhale, like a silent plea swallowed by the storm. He looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would step in, but every passerby avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice. The rain intensified, drumming against his shoulders. He knew what the right thing was. He knew what his conscience demanded. But he also knew that helping her could cost him his one chance at a stable life. His pulse hammered at the thought. Yet the longer he stood there, the louder his heart spoke. He had a decision to make, and he would have to make it now. He removed his jacket despite the cold, wrapping it around her thin shoulders, feeling how violently she shivered beneath the wet fabric. Her fragility startled him. She felt as light as a memory fading. "Let me help you stand," he murmured, crouching to support her weight. But she couldn't rise. Her legs gave out beneath her, and instinctively he shifted, turning his back so she could rest against him. She clung weakly, apologizing with trembling breaths he barely heard. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how natural the gesture felt, even though fear still clawed at his chest. Rain soaked through his shirt, chilling him to the bone, but he kept walking. Everything inside him screamed that he was losing precious time, but everything human inside him whispered that he was doing what mattered. Carrying her wasn't easy. The pavement was slick, the rain relentless, the weight of his choice heavier than the woman on his back. His breath fogged in the damp air as he moved slowly, aware that dropping her was not an option. Cars passed, their headlights reflecting off the rain. But one car, one dark, polished, expensive car, slowed abruptly. Its tires splashed water as it pulled to the curb, and the passenger door swung open in a rush of urgency. A man in a tailored coat stepped out, eyes widening as he recognized the woman on his shoulders. "Mother!" he shouted, breaking into a sprint. The young man froze, unsure whether he had helped or made a terrible mistake, his heartbeat echoing louder than the storm around him. The man reached them in seconds, his expression a mix of fear, disbelief, and overwhelming relief. He touched the elderly woman's face gently, brushing away strands of wet hair. She opened her eyes weakly, whispering something he couldn't hear. The rain softened for a moment, almost as if the world were holding its breath. "What happened?" the man asked, voice tight. He explained briefly, downplaying his actions, insisting he only did what anyone should have done. But the man's stare told him otherwise. Most people had passed her by. Most people had chosen convenience over compassion. And something shifted in the stranger's eyes as he realized the truth. This young man had saved the most important person in his life. They guided her toward the car together, her hand gripping the young man's arm as if she didn't want to let go. "Thank you," she whispered, her words fragile but filled with sincerity that pierced straight through him. The man, her son, hesitated before speaking again. "Let me take you wherever you're going," he offered. But the young man shook his head. He was already late. Far too late. He declined politely and stepped back into the rain, the weight of reality settling over him. He had made his choice, and chances like the one he had sacrificed rarely came twice. Still, as he walked away, something inside him felt strangely light. He had lost time, but he had not lost himself. He reached the building drenched, cold, and several minutes past the scheduled interview time. The receptionist stared at him with thinly veiled disapproval, her expression sharpening at the sight of his wet clothes. He tried to explain, just a few words, nothing dramatic, but she cut him off with a firm shake of her head. "The interview is over," she said. "No exceptions. No second chances." He stood there, chest tight, watching the door close on everything he had hoped for. The rain outside had eased, but inside him, a storm was just beginning. He stepped back into the street, unsure whether he had made the greatest mistake of his life or the greatest decision he would ever make. People often assume strength is loud, obvious, or easy to recognize. But the truth is that real strength lives in quiet places, inside the thoughts we don't share, inside the battles no one witnesses, inside the choices we make when absolutely no one is watching. As he walked away from the building, soaked and trembling, the young man felt the weight of invisible expectations pressing on his shoulders. He wasn't supposed to be late. He wasn't supposed to choose kindness over ambition. He wasn't supposed to lose the very opportunity he had fought years for. But life rarely aligns with supposed to. Instead, it tests us where it matters most, in silence, in solitude, in uncertainty. And that morning, as the rain slowed to a soft drizzle, he realized he was carrying something far heavier than disappointment. He was carrying the question of whether doing the right thing had been a mistake. He thought back to every sacrifice he had made to reach this moment. Nights spent studying until his eyes burned, early mornings working shifts no one else wanted, the quiet fear that he would never escape the cycle of struggle that seemed to follow him everywhere. He had spent years building himself, piece by piece, into someone who could finally step into a room of opportunity and be taken seriously. And now, because of a single choice, that room had closed its doors before he even reached it. The cruel part? He didn't regret helping her. He regretted the cost. Life has a way of forcing us to measure our principles against our survival, and he couldn't shake the fear that his principles had betrayed him this time. Still, beneath that fear, something deeper stirred, something that refused to let him see compassion as failure. There is a loneliness that comes from trying your best and still losing, a loneliness that gnaws at your confidence and whispers that you are foolish for believing in goodness. As he stood under a small awning, dripping water onto the pavement, he felt that loneliness pressing tightly around his ribs. People passed by quickly, unaware of the internal storm tearing through him. He wanted to scream, to cry, to question the universe, but instead he stood still, breathing slowly, fighting the urge to collapse into the hopelessness rising in his chest. The world teaches us to value results over intentions, success over character, speed over compassion. And yet, deep down, he knew that what he had done mattered. The problem was that the world didn't seem to agree, not yet, anyway. He checked his phone with trembling fingers, half hoping for a miracle, half expecting nothing at all. No messages, no calls, just the dim reflection of his tired eyes on the wet screen. He imagined the warm office inside the building he had just left, people shaking hands, smiling politely, making decisions he had hoped to be part of. Meanwhile, he stood here, shivering, with nothing to show for his morning except soaked clothes and a hollow ache in his chest. But there was something else too, a quiet clarity whispering beneath the disappointment. He had chosen humanity. He had chosen empathy over self-preservation. It didn't feel like victory, but it also didn't feel like defeat. It felt like truth, and truth has a way of resurfacing when we least expect it. He remembered the old woman's frail hand clutching his shoulder, the way her voice trembled with gratitude, the relief in her eyes when her son arrived. Those images replayed in his mind like a soft glow breaking through the grayness of his thoughts. They didn't erase his pain, but they eased it. For the first time that morning, a quiet warmth spread through his chest. Not pride, not joy, but something gentler, something honest. He wondered how many people had walked past her without stopping, how many times life had placed similar choices before him without him noticing. The rain tapped softly on the awning above him, as if encouraging him to keep breathing. Maybe kindness wasn't meant to be convenient. Maybe it was meant to cost something. Maybe that's what made it real. Still, the doubt lingered. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel right, not at first. It often feels messy, confusing, and painfully lonely. He thought of the receptionist's cold expression, the door closing in his face, the certainty that he had failed in the most practical sense. He wondered if anyone would ever understand why he chose what he chose. But beneath that uncertainty was a quiet inner voice that refused to disappear, a voice that insisted his morning wasn't over yet. Life rarely reveals its intentions immediately. Sometimes it lets us sink into despair just long enough for us to recognize who we really are. And in that recognition, something powerful takes shape, strength rooted not in success, but in character. As he stepped out from under the awning and began walking again, he felt the city come back to life around him. Cars hissed through the wet roads. People hurried by with umbrellas, and the clouds began to shift, letting a faint light break through. He felt strangely exposed, like someone stripped of both ambition and fear, left only with the raw truth of who he was. Every step echoed with conflicting emotions: loss, relief, uncertainty, dignity. He didn't know what waited ahead. He didn't know if he had destroyed his future or protected something far more important. What he did know was this: the world had not ended. He was still here. And sometimes, that alone is enough to keep walking. He tried to imagine how others might view his decision. Some would call him foolish. Others would say he lacked discipline or responsibility. Few would understand that helping her wasn't a choice for him. It was instinct, the natural pull of empathy he had carried all his life. He thought of the countless moments society encourages people to look away, to stay detached, to focus solely on themselves. He had refused to do that. And though he feared the consequences, he also realized he wouldn't change a single thing about his action. That realization didn't remove his worries, but it anchored him. For the first time since the interview was lost, he felt grounded, not in success, but in integrity. And integrity, he realized, had its own quiet power. He reached a small bench beneath a tree and sat down, letting the last drops of rain fall gently onto his hair. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, breathing slowly as he tried to gather the scattered pieces of his morning. The city noise dimmed, replaced by the rhythmic patter of water dripping from branches above him. He closed his eyes. In that calm, he didn't see failure. He saw a crossroads. One path had closed, yes, but another might still be waiting, hidden just beyond his sight. He didn't know how or when it would appear, but he felt, deep down, that his story wasn't finished. Life rarely ends in the moments that hurt the most. Often, those moments are where everything truly begins. When he finally opened his eyes, the world looked different, not brighter, not easier, but clearer. He stood, wiped the rain from his face, and prepared to walk home, unaware that life was about to interrupt him once more. His phone vibrated in his pocket. One message, one sentence, one unexpected spark of hope. Please return to the building. The general management would like to speak with you. He froze. The wind blew softly, lifting the edge of his damp shirt. He didn't understand what was happening, but his heart, still bruised, began to beat with renewed strength. Something had shifted, something unseen but significant. And whatever waited for him next, he was ready to face it. There is a strange ache that comes when you do the right thing and suffer for it, an ache that sits heavy in the chest, whispering questions you aren't ready to answer. As he walked back toward the building, phone still in his hand, he felt that ache tightening with every step. Was he being called back to be scolded? Laughed at? Asked to redo the interview only to be rejected again? Nothing made sense. The message was too vague, too sudden, too unexpected. His mind raced through every possibility, most of them painful. Yet even as fear tried to crush the hope rising inside him, a small voice refused to quiet. Maybe doing the right thing didn't lead to losing. Maybe it simply led to a different kind of path, one he had never imagined. The closer he came to the building, the more sharply he remembered the humiliation of moments earlier, the cold tone of the receptionist, the silent judgment in her eyes, the sting of hearing the word over before even being given a chance. He had walked away feeling stripped of dignity, as if the rain had washed away not just his clothes, but his dreams. Returning felt almost like walking back into a battlefield he had already lost. But something inside him pushed him forward. Not pride, not expectation, but curiosity, the kind that takes root when fate shifts direction without warning. He didn't know whether he was heading toward redemption or another wound. Either way, he couldn't turn back now. Inside, the building's warmth contrasted sharply with his cold, damp clothes. The receptionist glanced at him again, confused this time rather than disdainful. "They're expecting you upstairs," she said, her voice losing its earlier sharpness. He nodded, still unsure whether this was real. The elevator ride felt longer than any he had taken in his life, his reflection staring back, tired, soaked, but strangely calm. When the doors opened to the top floor, he stepped into a space unlike anything he had ever seen. Quiet, polished, almost intimidating in its elegance. He had never imagined he would stand here under these circumstances, his life hanging in the balance because of a decision made at a bus stop. Waiting in front of a pair of large glass doors, he felt the full weight of uncertainty settle into his bones. He didn't know who was inside. He didn't know whether this meeting was an opportunity or a reprimand. After everything he had endured that morning, the not knowing was the hardest part. He breathed slowly, grounding himself. Whatever happened next, he would face it with the same integrity that guided him earlier. He refused to let fear undo the choice he had made. If his kindness cost him everything, he would carry that truth with pride. But a part of him, small but undeniable, wondered if the world sometimes rewarded those who refused to turn away. Before he could silence that thought, the doors opened. Inside stood the man from the rain, the one who had run to the elderly woman with a look of desperation carved into his face. Now, dry and composed, he seemed entirely different, yet the gratitude in his eyes remained unmistakable. "Come in." the man said gently. The young man stepped forward, still unsure what he was walking into. But as soon as he saw the man behind the desk, everything inside him stilled. There, sitting with measured calm, was someone whose presence commanded the room effortlessly, someone who did not need introductions. He knew instantly that this was no ordinary employee. This was the one in charge, the CEO, and suddenly, the pieces began to connect in ways that made his heart race. "You helped my mother," the CEO said softly, not as a question but as a statement carved with emotion. The young man swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. I did what anyone should have," he whispered. But the CEO shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "not anyone. Many walked past her. You didn't." The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that carries meaning deeper than words. For a moment, the young man felt exposed, not judged, but seen, truly seen, and that alone shook something inside him. He realized this man wasn't evaluating his resume or measuring his qualifications. He was evaluating something else entirely, something the young man had never been asked to reveal in an interview: his humanity. The CEO leaned forward, his expression serious yet warm. "I want to ask you something," he said. "If you knew helping her would make you late, would you still have done it?" The question hit him like a sharp breath of cold air. He hesitated, not because he doubted his answer, but because saying it aloud made him feel vulnerable. "Yes," he finally replied. "I couldn't leave her there." The CEO studied him for a long moment, his eyes weighing truth with truth. And then, for the first time since the rain began that morning, a genuine, small smile formed on the CEO's lips, one that carried both relief and respect. The room's energy shifted. Something irreversible had just happened. "Then you're exactly the kind of person I want in this company," the CEO said. The words echoed inside him, almost unreal. After everything, the rain, the rejection, the despair, he had not only been given another chance, but something far greater, recognition that went deeper than professional ability. He felt his breath catch. He had expected judgment, maybe pity, certainly not this. "I'm offering you the position," the CEO continued. "Not because of timing, but because of character. Skills can be taught. Heart cannot." For a moment, the young man stood frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. It was as if the universe had rearranged itself to give him what he thought he had lost forever. His eyes stung unexpectedly, not from sadness, but from a sense of being understood in a way he never had been before. All the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the self-doubt, the fear, the constant pushing against circumstances stronger than him. Suddenly, they held meaning. Not because he had won something, but because he had proven to himself that he could stay kind even when kindness cost him everything. The CEO stood, extending his hand. The young man took it, feeling the warmth and sincerity behind the gesture. This wasn't a reward for luck. It wasn't charity. It was acknowledgement of strength, of integrity, of who he truly was beneath the surface. Before leaving the office, the CEO added one last request. "My mother wants to thank you personally." And when the young man entered the adjoining room, he saw her sitting comfortably, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes brighter than before. She reached for his hand with surprising strength, whispering, "You didn't let me fall." And in that moment, the young man understood something he had never realized before. Sometimes doing the right thing feels like losing, until life shows you that it was the only choice capable of changing everything. His heart felt full, not triumphant, but peaceful. Whatever came next, he knew he had chosen well. And life had answered. The moment he stepped into the room where the elderly woman waited, the world seemed to slow into a gentle stillness, the kind that makes you aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every emotion that begins to rise from a place too deep to name. She sat wrapped in a soft blanket, her frail hands resting on her lap, but her eyes, those warm, fragile eyes, held a strength that startled him. She looked at him not as a stranger, not as someone who had simply passed by, but as someone who mattered. "Come closer," she whispered, her voice delicate but steady. And as he approached, he felt something shift in his chest, something opening quietly, unexpectedly. Gratitude, he realized, had a way of revealing truths he had never considered before. When she reached out and took his hands, her grip was surprisingly firm, as if she were holding not just his fingers but the moment itself. You carried me when no one else would, she said softly, each word pressed with emotion that trembled yet did not break. Her son stood behind her, watching them with an expression that was both proud and humbled. The young man felt his throat tighten, unsure how to respond. He had never expected thanks. He had simply acted. But hearing her voice, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, made his choice feel different, heavier in its meaning. It reminded him that small actions ripple outward, touching lives in ways we rarely see. And in that room, he saw the ripple clearly. She asked him to sit beside her, and when he did, she studied him with a tenderness that made him look away for a moment, overwhelmed. "Do you know why my son is who he is?" she asked. He shook his head quietly. "Because someone once carried me the way you did today," she continued. The words struck him like a quiet thunder, unexpected and profound. She told him about a moment years ago when she had been lost, alone, struggling, when a stranger helped her without expecting anything in return. That act had shaped her, had shaped the values she passed to her son, had shaped the very foundation of the company he now led. And now, seeing the young man repeat that act, she felt as if life had come full circle. Her story painted the air with a kind of softness that held him captive, not because it was dramatic or heroic, but because it mirrored his own mourning, one moment of compassion becoming the turning point in an entire life. "Kindness," she said gently, "is never wasted. It travels. It grows. It returns." The young man felt a slow warmth spread through him, not pride, but understanding, deep, humbling understanding. The CEO, still standing behind her, nodded subtly, confirming the truth in her words. It wasn't luck that had brought him here. It wasn't coincidence. It was character intersecting with destiny. And destiny, he realized, often waits quietly for people who choose compassion over convenience. The elderly woman's voice softened further as she continued. "Most people rushed past me this morning. But you," she paused, squeezing his hand. "You stopped. You saw me." He swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken to him like that, with such gratitude for something he didn't consider extraordinary. But her words reached a place inside him he rarely acknowledged, the part that often wondered if being kind even mattered in a world that rewarded speed and ambition. Hearing her now, he realized it mattered more than he had ever imagined. Compassion wasn't weakness. It wasn't naive. It was powerful. And sometimes, the world recognized that power in the most unexpected ways. As they spoke, the CEO stepped closer, his expression solemn yet warm, as if seeing his mother and the young man together had revealed something even he hadn't expected. "I owe everything I am to her," he said quietly. "And today, she trusted you with her life." The young man looked down, humbled, unable to respond. He wasn't used to being seen this clearly. He wasn't used to being valued beyond his skills or resume. In that moment, the CEO wasn't a powerful leader and the young man wasn't a desperate job applicant. They were simply two people connected by a single act of humanity that bridged every difference between them. It felt profound. It felt grounding. It felt right. The elderly woman leaned back slightly, her breathing now steadier, her eyes soft with the kind of affection usually reserved for family. "Do you know what I wished for while you carried me?" she asked. He hesitated. "That someone would see you the way you saw me." The words struck him with unexpected force, filling his chest with a mixture of surprise and emotion that made blinking suddenly difficult. She continued softly, "You are the kind of person this world forgets to honor. But today, life decided to honor you." And just like that, something inside him shifted, something that had been heavy for too long. He felt seen, not for his struggles, not for his failures, but for his heart. The room fell into a peaceful quiet, the kind that carries truth between breaths. He realized that what he had gained today was bigger than a job. He had gained clarity, validation, and a kind of belonging he hadn't expected to find in a corporate building. The elderly woman smiled faintly. "Promise me one thing," she said. He leaned closer. "Don't ever lose the part of you that stopped for me today." Her words settled into him like seeds, firm and gentle, ready to take root. He nodded slowly, feeling the promise resonate deeper than any obligation. It wasn't pressure. It was purpose. And purpose, he realized, was far more valuable than opportunity. When the moment came to say goodbye, she held his hands again, but this time with a peaceful strength. "You gave me more than help this morning. she whispered. You reminded me that goodness still lives in the world. He felt his eyes sting again, overwhelmed by the sincerity she offered so easily. The CEO stepped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, his gaze filled with gratitude that words couldn't fully express. The young man stood quietly, feeling small and significant at the same time, a rare and beautiful combination. And in that rare moment, the rain outside seemed to lighten, as if even the sky were acknowledging the truth unfolding in that room. As he left the room, the elderly woman's final words followed him like a soft echo. Life will repay you in ways you cannot yet imagine. The corridor felt brighter, the air lighter, as if he had stepped into a different version of reality, one shaped not by loss, but by meaning. He realized then that helping her had not been a sacrifice. It had been a beginning he never would have found if he had chosen fear over compassion. Gratitude had not only revealed who he was, it had revealed where he was meant to go. And with every step, he felt the truth settle deeper. He had not lost anything. He had gained everything that mattered. Leaving the room where the elderly woman had expressed her gratitude, he stepped into the quiet hallway with a heart that felt heavier, yet somehow lighter at the same time, a contradiction that was difficult to hold. He paused, letting the moment settle inside him, feeling the lingering warmth of her words mix with the trembling disbelief he still carried. Only hours earlier he had walked these halls drenched, ashamed, and convinced he had failed. Now he walked them with a sense of meaning that felt almost unreal, as if life had turned itself inside out just to show him a different truth. He took a few slow breaths, grounding himself in the reality that he had not expected nor even dared to hope for. An opportunity had appeared, not the one he chased, but one born from the kind of character no resume could ever fully describe. And that realization changed everything. When he re-entered the CEO's office, he felt a new kind of tension in his chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, but the overwhelming pressure of unexpected possibility. The CEO stood by the large window, observing the city below as if weighing thoughts too heavy to articulate. For a moment, the young man wondered what worlds this man navigated daily, worlds of decisions, responsibility, and power. He felt small, yet he did not feel insignificant. When the CEO finally turned to him, his eyes held a measured calm. I want you to understand something, he said. Opportunities come in many forms. Some are earned through preparation. Others are revealed through character. The young man listened intently, realizing that this was not just a job conversation. It felt more like a test of identity, a bridge between who he had been and who he could become. The CEO walked slowly toward him, studying him not with scrutiny, but with a kind of thoughtful respect. What happened today, he continued, was more than a coincidence. You didn't choose strategy. You didn't choose advantage. You chose humanity. Those words settled heavily in the young man's mind. Humanity. It was strange to hear it valued in a corporate office, where most people emphasized efficiency and results above all else. Yet here he was, being told that the very act that had almost cost him everything was the reason he stood in this room now. The CEO's expression softened as he added, there are positions in this company that require exactly that, someone who sees beyond themselves. And with that, a sense of possibility he had never imagined began to take shape. He felt a mixture of disbelief and responsibility tightening inside him. This wasn't just a job offer. It was trust rooted not in qualifications, but in character. I won't pretend this morning was easy for you, the CEO said, his voice carrying a sincerity rarely found in business settings. Losing your interview must have felt like losing everything you worked for. The young man nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth without needing to describe the pain. But, the CEO continued, sometimes life takes something away only to return it in a completely different form. The young man felt those words resonate deeply. He had always believed that suffering had meaning, but he had never expected to see that meaning unfold so clearly, so quickly, so undeniably. The CEO returned to his desk and opened a folder, revealing documents the young man recognized, his resume, his application, his references. But there were also handwritten notes, observations the CEO must have read or written himself. Your background is not traditional, the CEO said. You've worked harder than most people ever will. You've studied late. You've held on a hope despite the world giving you every reason to give up. The young man swallowed, stunned that someone had taken the time to see him beyond bullet points and dates. People like you, the CEO added, are rare. And in that moment, the young man felt a validation he had never known, not for achievements, but for resilience. His struggles had not been invisible. His journey had not been unnoticed. Someone had understood. The CEO leaned back slightly, hands clasped, a gesture that blended authority with openness. Before I offer you anything, he said, I need to know something. The young man straightened, bracing himself. Are you ready to carry responsibility, not just for tasks, but for people? The question struck him deeply. Responsibility for people meant empathy, leadership, sacrifice, qualities he valued but had never imagined would matter in a corporate environment. He hesitated only long enough to gather his truth. Yes, he said quietly. If I'm given that trust, I'll honor it. The CEO studied him a moment longer, then nodded with a sense of decision. It felt like he had passed a test he hadn't known he was taking, one far more important than the interview he had lost. The CEO closed the folder with a soft, decisive motion. Then I want to offer you a position, he said. Not the one you applied for, a better one. The young man's breath caught. A better one? The idea seemed almost unreal, like something belonging to someone else's story. This role requires someone who understands people, the CEO explained. Someone who sees what others overlook. The young man listened, feeling humility and awe mix inside him like warm currents. You will learn, you will grow, and you will make mistakes, the CEO continued. But I believe you are the kind of person who improves everything he touches. Those words settled into him with a weight that felt both intimidating and empowering. A door he never imagined had just opened. Silence filled the room for a few moments, not awkward but reflective, allowing the magnitude of the moment to settle between them. The young man felt his heart pounding, not with fear, but with possibility, with the overwhelming realization that life had shifted direction in a single morning. Why me? He finally asked, unable to contain the question that had been building inside him. The CEO smiled faintly. Because you showed me something rare, he answered. You showed me who you are when no one is watching. Hearing that made the young man's throat tighten with emotion. It was strange, unsettling even, to be valued for something so deeply personal, something that wasn't taught or trained but rooted in who he was. The CEO extended a formal offer, but it didn't feel transactional. It felt intentional, grounded, meaningful. As the young man listened to the details, he realized that this opportunity was not a reward. It was a beginning, a path shaped not by luck, but by integrity. And the thought made him feel small in the best possible way. Everything he had endured, every sacrifice, every quiet moment of doubt, had led him to this point. He had been tested in a way no interview panel could ever replicate. And he had passed, not by proving his usefulness, but by proving his humanity. That truth alone made his chest swell with a kind of pride he had never felt before. When the meeting ended, the CEO shook his hand with a sincerity that made the moment feel almost sacred. Welcome, he said simply. And with that, the young man stepped out of the office with trembling hands and a full heart, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had unfolded. He had entered the building that morning as someone fighting desperately for one chance. He left this meeting as someone who had been offered something far greater, a destiny shaped not by qualifications, but by character. The hallway seemed brighter as he walked. The future seemed wider. And for the first time in a long time, he felt not only hopeful, but worthy. Walking out of the CEO's office, he felt as though the ground beneath him had quietly changed, as if the world had tilted just a few degrees, and he was the only one aware of the shift. Everything looked the same. The hallway, the polished floors, the muted hum of activity from distant offices, but nothing felt the same. He carried with him a new weight, not of burden, but of transformation, the kind that alters a person from the inside out long before the outside world notices. Minutes ago, he had been a young man soaked by rain, defined by struggle and dismissed by circumstance. Now, he walked with the knowledge that someone powerful had seen worth in him where he least expected it. The change was subtle yet profound, like the moment dawn begins to break even before the first ray of light appears. He stopped near a large window overlooking the city, watching raindrops slide down the glass like quiet reminders of the morning he had endured. The sky was beginning to clear, revealing soft hints of brightness pushing through the lingering clouds. It mirrored the shift inside him, a slow rising of confidence, fragile yet undeniable. He pressed his hand lightly against the cold glass, feeling the contrast between the storm outside and the calm settling within. How did all of this happen? He whispered to himself. The question carried equal parts wonder and disbelief. It didn't feel like luck. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt intentional, as though life had been waiting for him to choose the right thing so it could reveal the next chapter of his story. He thought of the version of himself who had walked through the rain hours earlier, worried, rushed, desperate to prove his worth to a company that didn't even know his name. That version had acted out of fear, out of scarcity, out of survival. But the version standing here now had tasted something different, validation rooted in character rather than accomplishment. It made him realize that growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it happens in the quiet moments between choices, in the split seconds when you decide who you want to be regardless of the consequences. He had chosen compassion, and compassion had rewritten his path in ways ambition alone never could. The realization filled him with an unexpected sense of peace. As he walked toward the elevator, he noticed small details he had overlooked before. The way employees smiled politely at one another, the calm rhythm of footsteps along the corridor, the blend of determination and purpose in the atmosphere. He wondered how many of them had ever faced a moment like his, a moment where doing the right thing cost them something real. He wondered how many had chosen the harder path, the slower path, the more human path. And then he wondered how many of them had ever been rewarded for it. The thought stirred something inside him, a spark of responsibility, a whisper of leadership. His story wasn't just about him anymore. It was becoming something larger. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the elevator descended, he watched his reflection in the mirrored walls. Wet hair, wrinkled clothes, a face still carrying traces of anxiety. But beneath that exterior was someone new, someone he barely recognized yet felt deeply connected to. He saw humility in his gaze, but also quiet strength, the kind forged through hardship and affirmed by compassion. He stood taller, not out of pride, but out of understanding. The journey that had once felt heavy now felt meaningful. And meaning, he realized, was stronger than success, stronger than fear, stronger than the doubts that had followed him for years. The lobby was bustling when he stepped out, filled with the usual rhythm of phones ringing, conversations flowing, and footsteps crossing polished floors. But he felt as though he were walking in slow motion, every sound muted by the internal clarity unfolding within him. People glanced at him briefly, none aware of the transformation happening in his mind, none aware that he had just been offered a future shaped not by luck, but by integrity. He breathed in the warm air of the lobby, feeling a sense of renewal settle into his bones. He wasn't the same man who had walked in drenched and defeated. He was someone who had faced a moral crossroad and chosen a direction most people overlook. As he pushed open the front doors and stepped outside, the world greeted him differently. The storm had quieted, leaving behind the fresh scent of rain and the soft glow of a clearing sky. Sunlight peeked through the clouds, casting shimmering reflections across the wet pavement. He paused on the sidewalk, letting the air fill his lungs, grounding himself in the present moment. People hurried past like always, living lives filled with unseen struggles and quiet victories. For the first time, he felt part of something bigger, connected not by circumstance, but by the shared human experience of hardship and hope. He realized that everyone was carrying something unseen, just as he had carried something unseen all morning. He began walking slowly, unsure of where he was heading, but certain he was not going backward. With every step, he felt the invisible weight of the morning lift, replaced by something gentler, something encouraging. He thought of his mother, the sacrifices she had made, the lessons she had taught him, the values she had instilled in him long before he understood their worth. She would be proud, he knew, not because he had been offered a job, but because he had acted with compassion when it mattered most. That thought alone warmed him more deeply than the clearing sky above. He carried her voice with him, every word echoing in his memory like guidance for the road ahead. He wondered how he would tell her what had happened today. How could he explain the whirlwind of events, The elderly woman, her powerful son, the unexpected opportunity that had risen from what felt like failure. He knew she wouldn't be surprised. She always believed life had a way of rewarding good hearts, even when the world seemed blind to them. He smiled softly at the thought. Maybe she had been right all along. Maybe the world did notice kindness, just not immediately. Maybe kindness worked quietly, building paths in the shadows until the moment came to reveal them in the light. And today, light had found him. As he reached the corner of the street, he stopped for a moment, letting the sunlight settle on his face. Everything felt different, yet everything was exactly as it should be. He understood now that becoming who we are meant to be often requires losing who we were, not through force, but through choice. He had chosen compassion over ambition, humanity over convenience, courage over fear. And life had answered. Not instantly, not easily, but undeniably. With a final deep breath, he stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. For the first time in his life, he wasn't simply hoping for a future. He was stepping into one. As he walked away from the building, the thought kept circling in his mind like a quiet echo. In the end, what truly changed his life wasn't what he owned, what he wore, or what he had achieved on paper. It was who he had chosen to be when the moment demanded something real from him. The world often measures people by what they can show, what they can prove, what they can boast about. But that morning, when he was carrying an elderly woman on his back through the rain, no one saw a resume, a degree, or a title. They saw a human being. And that was enough to change everything. It struck him deeply that the turning point of his story had nothing to do with perfection. It had everything to do with character, raw, unpolished, unplanned character. For most of his life, he had believed he needed to accumulate more to become worthy. More experience, more knowledge, more stability, more proof that he belonged in rooms like the one he had just left. But now, as he replayed the CEO's words in his mind, he realized that worth didn't start with having more. It started with being more honest, more compassionate, more willing to act when others hesitated. It wasn't that skills didn't matter. They did, and he knew he would still need to work hard, learn, grow, and improve. But beneath all of that lived something much more important. The person he chose to be when no one was keeping score. And for the first time, he understood that this inner foundation was the true core of his value. He thought of the countless nights he had spent doubting himself, convinced that his struggles made him less than those who'd had easier paths. Yet now, he could see how those very struggles had shaped him into someone capable of carrying another person, physically and emotionally, without hesitation. His hardships had not made him harder. They had made him softer in the best way, more sensitive to pain, more aware of loneliness, more willing to respond when life put someone vulnerable in his path. And that softness, he realized, was not weakness at all. It was strength, quiet, steady, and unshakable. It was the kind of strength that didn't need to shout to be real. The job he had just been offered would change his circumstances. Yes. It would help him pay his bills, support his family, and finally step into a life with more stability. But what stayed with him even more than the opportunity itself was the realization that the job had come not despite his values, but because of them. In a world where people often feel forced to choose between success and integrity, he had stumbled into a powerful truth. Real success is built on integrity, not in place of it. The CEO had seen something in him that the world rarely rewards immediately: decency, courage, compassion. And now that he had been seen, he felt a quiet responsibility to continue being that person, not just when it earned him something, but always. He remembered a line his mother used to say whenever life felt unfair: "Life may not pay you every day, but it never forgets your work." At the time, those words had sounded poetic but distant, like something people say to comfort themselves when nothing changes. Today, those words felt different. They felt real. The morning had started like a story of injustice. He had done the right thing and lost his chance. But as the hours unfolded, he realized that life had been keeping track all along, not just of what he did in that moment, but of who he had allowed himself to become through years of struggle. The job was not a reward for a single act. It was the fruit of a character cultivated over time. He wondered how many people walk through their lives unaware of their own worth, measuring themselves only by the opportunities they had, the money they made, or the recognition they received. He wondered how many kind hearts went unnoticed simply because no one had been there at the right moment to see them act. The thought stirred something tender and protective inside him. He wanted people like that to know what he now understood, that their choices mattered even when no one acknowledged them, that their goodness was not wasted just because the world seemed indifferent. He wished he could tell them that there are days when life will finally hold up a mirror and say, "I saw you. I saw everything." As he walked past shop windows and reflections of strangers hurrying by, he began to see people differently. The man rushing with 3 bags and tired eyes. Maybe he was holding his world together in ways no one appreciated. The woman staring blankly at her phone. Maybe she'd made a hard decision no one knew about. The older gentleman sitting alone at a cafe. Maybe he'd carried more responsibility in his life than anyone ever thanked him for. Suddenly, the world felt full not just of faces, but of stories, quiet, heavy, beautiful stories shaped not by possessions or status, but by unseen choices, unseen sacrifices, unseen acts of love. It made him feel less alone and more connected at the same time. He realized then that who you are when no one is watching doesn't just affect your own path. It shapes the invisible threads connecting you to others. His decision to help the elderly woman had not only altered his life, it had touched hers, soothed her son's fear, reminded the CEO of the values his mother had instilled in him, and would eventually impact the company he was about to join. Character, he saw now, was not just a personal trait. It was a force, a quiet, powerful force that could ripple through people, structures, and futures in ways you cannot predict when you are simply choosing to be kind. He thought back to the exact moment at the bus stop when he hesitated, the small space of time where he had been pulled between fear and compassion. It would have been so easy to pretend he didn't see her, to keep walking, to tell himself that someone else would help, that he couldn't afford to stop. But he had stopped, and that one pause had become the hinge of everything that came after. It amazed him how quickly life could turn on a decision that, in the moment, felt like nothing more than a tug in his chest. It made him realize how many small decisions might hold enormous weight, quietly directing the path of his destiny. Standing at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter how much his life improved, no matter how many floors he eventually worked on, no matter how his title or salary changed, he would never let go of the part of him that turned toward the woman in the ring. That part of him, the part that saw, that cared, that acted, was his greatest asset. More than his resume, more than his experience, more than his hunger for success. Because in the end, he understood now, what defines a life is not what you accumulate, but what you give, especially when it costs you something. And that truth, once seen, could never be unseen again. As he continued walking through the city streets, he began to realize that life was made not of grand events or dramatic turning points, but of quiet crossroads, moments so ordinary on the surface that you only recognize their importance long after they've passed. The morning's chaos was already fading into memory, yet the lesson it carried was becoming sharper with every breath he took. Destiny, he thought, wasn't some distant force pulling strings from afar. It was shaped moment by moment, decision by decision, in the spaces where fear and courage fight quietly for control. What he did that morning at the bus stop had felt instinctive, almost small. But now, he saw it clearly. It wasn't small at all. It was everything. It was the thread that connected him to where he was heading next. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently. If he had taken a different route. If he had walked a little faster. If he had looked away instead of stepping closer. 1,000 tiny details, invisible at the time, had guided him to that exact moment where a fragile life collapsed into his path. And then, 1,000 more tiny details had guided him from that moment to the CEO's office. It struck him how life often gives you a chance to reveal your true self long before anyone else sees it. And sometimes, it does so quietly, through a stranger in need, a fleeting hesitation, a voice inside whispering, "This is the moment." What he once thought was an accident now felt intentional, almost sacred. It was as if the universe had been preparing him for that exact test. He remembered the look in the CEO's eyes, not the authority, not the power, but the recognition. It was the look of someone who had once stood at a crossroads too. Someone who knew what it meant to choose compassion in a world that often rewarded selfishness. That recognition had formed a bridge between them, an invisible connection built not on titles or achievements, but on shared humanity. The thought made him wonder how many people in positions of influence were shaped by quiet moments like his. How many leaders had been molded by times when they chose kindness even though no one was watching. It humbled him to think that perhaps the world was held together not by laws or systems, but by countless unseen acts of goodness. He began to reflect on all the moments in his life that had seemed insignificant at the time, but had shaped him without his realizing it. His mother encouraging him to stand up for others, a teacher who had told him he had potential, the long nights he spent studying even when exhaustion clouded his vision. None of those moments had felt monumental then. Yet every one of them had built the person he became today, the person who did not hesitate to lift a stranger from the cold pavement. The realization made him feel both grateful and introspective. It reminded him that growth isn't visible in real time. It blooms slowly, silently, through every experience that challenges or softens the heart. But he also knew that not all unseen moments were gentle. Some were painful, rejections, failures, losses, disappointments that carved lines through his spirit. He remembered times he had felt invisible, unworthy, overlooked. Times when he had wondered whether his life would ever change or whether he was destined to struggle forever. Those memories rose uninvited, yet instead of hurting him, they suddenly illuminated the present. If not for those hardships, he might have walked past the old woman like so many others had. If not for those wounds, he might have never developed the tenderness that moved him to act. Pain had shaped his compassion. Difficulty had refined his strength. And today, both had opened a door that once seemed unreachable. As he crossed a small park, he noticed families, workers, students, and elderly people moving through their afternoon routines. Ordinary scenes that now felt extraordinary in their quiet significance. Every one of them, he realized, was living out invisible stories formed by choices no one else had witnessed. That understanding filled him with a sense of empathy so deep it almost ached. How many people were carrying their own turning points unnoticed? How many had made sacrifices that had never been acknowledged? How many had lost opportunities because they chose kindness over convenience? And how many, he wondered, would one day be rewarded for it the way he had been? The thought gave him a newfound appreciation for the unseen world that exists beneath the surface of everyday life. A world made of moments that don't make headlines, but do shape destinies. He understood now that destiny wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't something that appeared with fanfare. It was quiet, patient, woven into the spaces where you decide who you are going to be. He realized that the woman at the bus stop had not only needed him, he had needed her too. She had been the mirror that showed him his truest reflection. She had been the turning point he didn't know he was waiting for. Without her, he might have kept doubting his worth. With her, he discovered it. He stopped at a small cafe window, watching people inside laugh and talk, unaware of the transformation happening just inches from them. It amazed him how life could change so drastically while the world around remained absolutely ordinary. The contrast made him smile. It reminded him that the biggest internal revolutions happen without announcement, without applause, without grand gestures. They happen in the heart, in silence. And when they do, the world doesn't change, but the way you move through it does. Even now, as he stood there watching strangers sipping coffee, he felt himself expanding, growing into the version of himself he had never dared to imagine. He resumed walking, noticing now how the sunlight reflected off the wet pavement in shimmering patterns. It felt symbolic, as though the storm had washed something away, not just the rain, but a version of himself weighed down by doubt and fear. He breathed deeply, letting the fresh air fill him with a sense of renewal. He felt ready, not just for the job, but for the expectations, the challenges, the growth that would follow. For once, the future didn't feel like something he needed to chase. It felt like something he was slowly stepping into, one steady, intentional step at a time. And oddly, beautifully, he no longer felt alone in that journey. At the end of the street, he stopped once more and glanced back in the direction of the company building. This time, he didn't see a place of judgment, fear, or rejection. He saw a door that had opened for him, not because he forced his way inside, but because he walked with integrity when no one was watching. And that realization gave him a deeper peace than he had ever known. Whatever the future held, he understood now that destiny is not written in advance. It is written in moments. Moments of courage, moments of compassion, moments where your heart chooses before your mind catches up. And today, his destiny had shifted in the direction of who he truly was meant to become. As the day slowly unfolded into late afternoon, he felt an extraordinary stillness settling inside him, the kind that comes only after a storm, when the sky clears and the world feels quietly remade. He walked with a sense of grounding he had never known before, every step carrying the weight of what had happened and the lightness of what it meant. This morning, he thought he had lost everything. He thought life had punished him for choosing kindness over ambition. Yet now, he understood something far greater. Life had not punished him. It had prepared him. It had tested him, revealed him, and then rewarded him with a path built not on luck, but on truth. And that truth would stay with him long after the rain dried from the streets. He paused again, letting the memory of the elderly woman's voice rise inside him like a soft echo. "Don't ever lose the part of you that stopped for me today." Those words, tender yet commanding, felt like a lesson he was meant to carry into every chapter of his future. He realized now that compassion is not a detour from success. It is a direction. The kind of direction that shapes not only careers, but lives, reputations, and legacies. She had seen something in him that the world often overlooks, a heart willing to act even at personal cost. And in seeing him, she had also reminded him that the world is changed not by grand gestures, but by ordinary people who refuse to ignore suffering when it appears before them. He thought of the CEO, his quiet authority, the gratitude in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice as he offered the job. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. Respect earned not through flawless performance, but through flawed humanity, soaked clothes, trembling hands, late arrival, and all. The CEO had understood what many employers never ask. Who is a person when the world is not watching? What choices do they make when nothing is guaranteed? And the CEO had seen his answer not in a resume, but in the rain. That realization humbled him deeply. Opportunities, he understood now, were not simply handed out. They were recognized in the shape of a person's actions. As he stood at a crosswalk watching people pass, rushed, distracted, burdened, he felt a deep sense of kinship with them all. He realized that everyone, at some point, faces a moment that will silently define them. Not a grand moment, not an epic test, but a simple one. A stranger needing help, a choice between comfort and courage, a moment where heart must speak louder than fear. Most people will never know when those moments happen, but life always remembers. And today, life had remembered him. He understood now that destiny isn't written ahead of time. It is written in these invisible intersections where a person's values rise to meet a difficult decision. He had always believed his worth depended on how well he performed under pressure, how perfect he could appear, how convincing he could be in interviews or on paper. But the truth revealed itself quietly, profoundly. His worth had shown itself not in performance, but in presence. In the moment he knelt beside a shivering woman instead of walking past her. In the moment he sacrificed his chance for her safety. In the moment he chose compassion over convenience. The world rarely applauds these choices immediately. Sometimes it rejects you for them. But ultimately, they build a foundation that no rejection can ever break. And today, that foundation had opened a door he once thought unreachable. He thought of the version of himself who had almost kept walking, the version terrified of losing the future he desperately needed. If he had listened to that fear, the entire day would have unfolded differently. No gratitude, no revelation, no unexpected opportunity, no transformation. It struck him deeply how a single hesitation could have rewritten his entire fate. And with that thought came a quiet vow that whenever life placed another crossroads before him, he would choose the path that aligned with his soul, not the one padded with safety or efficiency. Because the soul, he now understood, sees farther than fear ever could. He walked further until the company building disappeared behind him, but the meaning of the day stayed close, like a warm pulse beneath his ribs. He felt stronger, not because he had gained a job, but because he had gained knowledge about himself. knowledge that no setback could take away. He was not the weak one. He was not the unlucky one. He was not the overlooked one. He was the one who stopped, the one who cared, the one who carried a stranger through the rain at the cost of everything he thought he needed. And that choice did not break him. It revealed him. It revealed the man he truly was. He knew there would be more storms in his life, more moments of uncertainty, more crossroads that asked for courage. But now he carried proof, living, breathing proof, that kindness is not weakness and compassion is not foolishness. Kindness builds invisible bridges. Compassion writes invisible recommendations. And character, quiet, humble character, opens doors more powerful than ambition ever could. He understood now that people rise not because life is fair, but because they remain fair when life is not. That truth, once learned, becomes a guiding force stronger than any fear. As he reached his neighborhood, the sky finally cleared completely, sunlight spreading across the pavement like a blessing. He paused to absorb it, letting the warmth seep into him. Today had begun with rain and fear. It ended with clarity and purpose. He was still the same person, but his understanding of himself had changed forever. He no longer measured his value by success or failure. Now he measured it by the choices he was willing to make when no one was watching. That, he realized, was the truest definition of character. And character, he now knew, could change a life. With a steady breath, he stepped forward into the rest of his life, not as the man who had lost an interview, but as the man who had gained everything that mattered. He walked not with pride, but with gratitude, not with fear, but with conviction, not with doubt, but with a quiet, powerful certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The world would present new tests, new struggles, new moments of choice. But he would face them with the same heart that stopped in the rain. Because in the end, destiny is not shaped by what we hope for, it is shaped by what we do. And on that rainy morning, he had done the one thing that mattered. He chose to be human. And life chose him back,